Mr. Kashishian, it's all yours.
Yes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the board, members of the staff, Mr. Tom, and welcome to Building and Fire Board of Appeals monthly meeting. And with that, we'd like to go with a roll call, please.
Board Member Alexander Wu.
Here.
Board Member Michael Chakmajian.
Here.
Board Member John Tatulian.
Here.
Board Member Deborah Dentler.
Here.
Chairman Eric Kashishian.
Here.
Item number 2, we have presentations and commendations. Today we have none.
Actually, Ms. Luna, let me take the opportunity for our viewing public under presentations to welcome at least 2 new members to our board. First, before I do that, though, I would like to acknowledge that since our last meeting, our previous chairman, Bahman Ehsan, has stepped down from this board, and we will be acknowledging Mr. Ehsan properly at a future meeting for his years of service on this board and as our previous chairman. But that being said, it is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to welcome to our community here our 2 newest members to the Building and Fire Board of Appeal. We have Michael Chakmajian, and we also have Deborah Dentler. And with that, if it pleases the board, why don't we go in order and just have an opportunity for you to tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Me first?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. My name is Deborah Dentler, and I'm delighted to be joining the Building and Fire Board of Appeals today for my first meeting. I am a resident of Glendale. I've lived here since, 1989. I'm a homeowner in the Glen Oaks Canyon or Shoal Canyon area, and I'm an attorney by profession. I have a small business of my own here in Glendale, and I specialize in appeals before the California Court of Appeals. My previous service to the city included 2 terms on the city commission we have here in Glendale to protect historic resources, and that's the Historic Preservation Commission. I served 2 terms there, and I believe I was chair twice, if memory serves. I've also been a member of the Board of Directors of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, where I represented the city of Los Angeles, actually, at that time. So I have past board and commission experience, and I'm delighted to be bringing that experience to this board.
Well, welcome, and I'm sure we will take advantage of your experience. Michael.
My name is Michael Chakmajian. I'm born and raised in Glendale. I'm contractor, developer by profession, and it's my first time on serving for a board or a commission for the city.
Well, welcome to you as well, and I'm sure we will take advantage of your experience as a contractor here as well. And with that, why don't we turn it back over to you, Ms. Luna, to resume with the agenda.
Item number 3, oral communications. We have 1 speaker by the name of Hiran Der Sarkisian.
I believe Mr. Der Sarkisian has turned in a speaker card because he is the appellant under item 6A, so we can move on.
Item number 3, we have the approval of minutes of previous meeting dated September 16th, 2009.
At item 4A, we do have the minutes from September 16th, 2009. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those minutes. As is usually the case, Ms. Luna did a meticulous job going over the minutes, and I also reviewed the minutes, and they appeared to be accurate. However, if you have any corrections that you would like us to note, we would be happy to entertain them. And if not, it would be appropriate at this time to go ahead and have a motion and a second for approval. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman.
I move to approve the minutes from September 16, 2009 meeting.
I second the motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we have a roll call?
Board Member Alexander Wu.
Yes.
Board Member Michael Chakmajian.
Yes.
Board Member John Tatulian.
Yes.
Board Member Deborah Dentler.
I think it's appropriate for me to abstain since I wasn't present for the last meeting, so I'll abstain.
And Chairman Eric Kashishian.
Yes. I guess I was absent also last time. on this particular meeting?
If you either attended in person or if you had an opportunity to view the recording, you can still act on this.
Yes.
Oh, and I watched the recording as well.
So if the minutes appeared accurate as to your viewing, an abstention is still appropriate if you would like, or if you would like to go on record as approving it, that would be fine as well.
I'll be happy to change my vote to a yes, approve.
So we have 5 ayes. Very good.
Item number 5, old business. Today we have none. Item number 6, new business.
At item 6A, we get to the meat of today's public hearing. We have a public hearing that is relatively uncommon here in the city of Glendale, and I will be taking some time to explain it. At item 6A, we have a public hearing for the ratification of exemption from disabled access due to physical or legal constraints. It is case number BMOD 20101116 for property located at 205 through 211 East Broadway. And the ratification hearing, or the purpose of this hearing, I should say, is to permit the installation of a new elevator within an existing building without providing an accessible path of travel from all points of the building to the entrance of that elevator. At the conclusion of this hearing, we have 2 possible actions that could be taken by this board. Action at item A1 would be to ratify the building official's exemption from disabled access due to physical or legal constraints. And an alternate action would be to deny the applicant's request for an exemption from disabled access due to physical or legal constraints, thereby requiring him to comply with the strict language of the code. With that, what I would like to do is first turn your attention to the staff report, which can be found behind the second tab in your packet. Before we get on with the staff report, I would like to note that the owner's architect, who is his agent and the applicant today, is in the audience. He has turned in a speaker card, and he will be available to clarify any questions that the board may have. I'd also like to take the opportunity to explain why this hearing is slightly different than some others that you might be experienced with. And that is because this is a ratification hearing. Unlike most other hearings that come before this board, wherein an appellant is seeking some type of slight relief or an adjustment from the code, that is not the case for this particular appeal. Under state law, when an exemption, a full exemption, is granted by me as the city's building official with respect to a disabled access regulation in particular, that action must further be ratified by a duly appointed board. If this case had involved a slight modification of a code requirement and the appellant was indeed attempting to comply but merely needed a slight modification of the code in order to achieve that compliance, such an action could be taken by myself and it would not need to be ratified. But in this particular case, the appellant is indeed seeking a full waiver of this particular requirement. What I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and just go through the staff report. It's very, very brief, about 2.5 pages. I'm just going to read the report to enter the report into the record, and then I'll just go over some facts and answer any questions that you might have. Okay, first, in terms of this staff report, it is a public hearing, and as you can see on the bottom of page 1 of the staff report, I do have for you a recommendation, and that recommendation is to ratify the building official's determination to permit the installation of a new elevator in an existing building without providing an accessible path of travel from all points of the building to the entrance of such elevator. If you flip the page, I will enter into the record the factual information regarding this particular appeal. For general information, the project is located at 205 through 211 East Broadway, Glendale, California, zip code 91205. Perhaps some, or probably all of you, are familiar with this site. This is Rafi's restaurant just down the street from us. The owner is Mr. Rafik Bakijian, and his contact address is at that site, 211 East Broadway, Glendale, California, 91205. The applicant today is Mr. Harander Sarkisian. He is a licensed architect here in the state of California, and his business contact address is 520 East Glen Oaks Boulevard, Suite D, Glendale, California, 91207. Those are his new digs. The applicant's request, basically a reiteration of what I've already stated, is formally to permit the installation of a new elevator in an existing building without a compliant path of travel from all points of the building to the elevator as required. What I've done for the board's benefit is I've included the applicable code sections that pertain to this case. So since you've all had an opportunity to review this packet in advance, you've probably had a chance to read it, but I will go ahead and read it verbatim to enter it into the record. The section of the California State Building Code as adopted here in the City of Glendale that is at issue is Section 1103B, which reads, an accessible route of travel complying with Section 1114B.1.2 shall connect all elements and spaces within a building or facility. Multi-story buildings and facilities must provide access to each level, including mezzanines, by ramp or passenger elevator, complying with Section 1116B. If more than one elevator is provided, each passenger elevator shall comply with Section 1116.B. Additionally, Section 1104B.5 is applicable to this particular appeal because the subject site supports a restaurant establishment. Section 1104B.5, dining, banquet, and bar facilities. Item number 1, general. Dining, banquet, and bar facilities shall be made accessible to persons with disabilities as provided in this section. All areas where each type of functional activity occurs shall be made accessible. The building official's action in this particular case, on February 9th, 2010, I approved the applicant's request subject to ratification by this board. That's why we're here today. In summary, the subject project involves interior alterations to an existing legal nonconforming building. The alterations are proposed to include a voluntary elevator addition, which will actually improve accessible access to a second floor of a portion of the building. Pursuant to 1103B, which I read, of this code, an accessible route of travel would be required to extend from all portions of the ground floor level to that elevator entrance. The existing building was originally constructed many years ago without a common floor elevation. The site has a gradual and continuous slope, which presents physical difficulties in establishing an accessible path of travel from all portions of the ground floor to the proposed elevator location. Furthermore, it is not practical to relocate the elevator to a suitable location that would be accessible from all portions of the ground floor, because the second story is located only over a portion of such ground floor area. Consequently, options for placing a new elevator are severely limited. The voluntary addition of an elevator will improve accessibility to the building beyond its current state. That's an important consideration because this is a voluntary elevator, and the applicant can actually comply today by simply not putting the elevator in. It's not a required elevator. Clearly putting the elevator in is an improvement to the previously legal nonconforming building, and this is one of those situations where in an attempt to bring the building closer into compliance with contemporary standards, other standards are in conflict, and so the applicant is here for some relief today. As far as the justification is concerned, I always attempt to support this board by identifying justifications for potential actions that could be taken, and I've taken the liberty to do so today. The justifications which did apply to this particular case, which were also the justifications that I used in my action, were as follows. The applicant has submitted the following justification for request. Item number 1, due to the unique physical configuration of the building and the location of the second floor not directly above the main restaurant area and main restaurant entrances, makes it impossible to comply with the requirement of serving all areas of the building with an elevator in a practical manner. Item number 2, this request is only a slight deviation from the requirements of 11B, since the elevator provides access solely for the owner and some limited staff to a small area of the building only. I would like to point out that if this building were configured much differently, so that there were rather significant areas of the upper portion of the building which would need to be accessible to the general public, and if the expected number of individuals that would need to gain access to that upper floor were rather extensive, justification or finding number 2 would not be able to be made. But in this particular case, and I will let the applicant describe in detail later what the function of that second floor is, but at this time I'll go ahead and describe it briefly. It's a very, very small private administrative office. It's the offices that are used to run the restaurant. Probably some of the building activities, payroll, things of that nature are conducted up there, and clearly the degree to which individuals need to gain access to that area is limited to the proprietor of that establishment, and general customers would not be expected to need access to that level. And then finally, number 3, the spirit and intent of the code is met, as all public areas of the first floor restaurant are accessible and compliant with the requirements of 11B of the Glendale Municipal Code with respect to the dining area itself. And the upper floor access is facilitated by the proposed elevator for the limited number of people who enter the building from the north entry and directly go to the upper floor. So with respect to those individuals that would need to gain access to the upper floor for administrative purposes, that elevator does comply for their needs. As far as attached exhibits are concerned, I do have the applicant's actual application form attached if you would like to review that and if you have any questions. But at this time what I'd like to do is I'd like to draw your attention to the screen. And if you're listening, Brian, if you could cut to our floor plan. Thank you. What you can do is you can either look at the small monitor behind you, or if it's easier to see, you can take a look at the large screen. And the viewing public can take a look on their television, and they're seeing the same thing that we're seeing. The applicant, Mr. Dursarkisian, has given to us a floor plan of the building which identifies where the work is proposed. This is the actual site of the restaurant. And for those that are familiar with the site just down the street on Broadway, this is the primary entrance to the partially covered outdoor dining area. Outside the restaurant, we do have frontage along Broadway right here. And this is that 20-foot alley on the side. The owner of the building recently took possession of the adjoining building next door, which was previously utilized as a small law office. And the owner is in the process of expanding and enhancing his restaurant operation. Involved in it will be a rather major remodel of the kitchen facility and some changes in the entrance to the rear of the adjoining building, which will provide that new proposed elevator area. This is the parking area which you might be familiar with behind the restaurant and the adjoining building. And it is this area right in here that we are really focusing on today. This was previously the entrance to the adjoining building space, and it's in this area right here where the owner intends to install a voluntary elevator upgrade which will enhance the accessibility to that upper office area. This is the actual elevator cab space, and this is the lobby to that new elevator. The reason that it is not feasible or practical to comply with the sections of the code which I've recited into the record is that the primary dining area, as those of you who are familiar with the restaurant realize, is in this portion of the building right here. And due to a grade differential in that particular area, the finished floor surface elevation of this dining room area is at a completely different level than this lobby. So there is no potential to put in a ramp without completely defeating the new restaurant remodel for the kitchen area, or having, just due to the sheer vertical rise, a rather lengthy switchback ramp. Furthermore, it's not practical to relocate this elevator here to some location over in the area which does have the common floor surface area, because the second floor of the building does not project above this area. This is the outdoor, partially covered dining area, and were the applicant to simply propose putting the elevator in any location wherein the lobby would have a common path of travel to the dining area, that elevator could not serve the upper floor office in this particular space. So this is clearly a rather unique situation, and as I described before, what has created this situation is that the property owner and his architect are attempting to make some voluntary upgrades to an existing building which simply does not meet today's standards. While it goes a rather significant way in improving accessibility to the upper area, which is not accessible today, he does run into the conflict of not providing a continuous path of travel from all portions of the site, which would include this dining area, and that is why this is before you today. As I mentioned, I have already reviewed this particular case. I've taken an action to approve the waiver of that continuous path of travel for the reasons that I've previously stated. And this case is here before you today to discuss and deliberate, and if you see fit, to ratify my action. If you feel that my action was inappropriate, you can choose to not ratify it, in which case the applicant will have to come up with some alternate solution, or possibly not install the elevator. And with that, I will turn the matter over to you, Mr. Chairman. However, be aware of the fact that the applicant, Mr. Dursarkisian, is here. He is intimately familiar with this site, and he can describe in much more detail some of the physical characteristics of this site and some of the things that he has done to attempt to comply, and I'm sure he can do a much better job than I did in explaining why there is a physical hardship.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tom, for that staff report and explanation. And Mr. Dursarkisian, at this point, you want to come up and explain to us?
Hello, I'm Dursarkisian. I'm a practicing architect. My address is 520 East Glen Oaks Boulevard, Suite D, and I welcome the new members. A number of the faces are familiar to me. I think I've worked with some people on various commissions in Glendale. In any case, I think Mr. Tom is using this as a baptism to the new members. This is, I think, an easy case. Frankly, the restaurant is entirely on the first floor and is totally accessible. It is on one level, and we have connected the two pieces, but we have attempted, and there is a ramp between, because there is 7-inch difference between the two buildings, because Broadway rises as it goes from west to east. And we've already handled that for all the handicap requirements. So the entire restaurant is on one level, and it's accessible to all the handicaps. This is a totally separate use upstairs, and it used to have an exit stair at the back. It's being enlarged, and we have slightly relocated the internal stair, but it's just a voluntary elevator, and I frankly didn't cross my mind that we were going to be in front of you when we proposed to do it. And that was a surprise where we had to go through this process, because we thought we were doing somebody a favor by installing an elevator and a better stair for a building. The building is going to have the entire rear area as a valet handling, car handling area. It has received an exemption from the council for the parking. We've gone through all this process. Actually, it's under construction, and this is an amendment to our permit just to widen the stair, but we encountered this issue with the handicap. One of the primary goals of this remodel was to expand the kitchen facility, frankly. The portion of those of you that have or are familiar with the restaurant that it presently is indoor, that is also going to be opened up, and it will become an outdoor area. The key to this restaurant is it's outdoor, it's the courtyard and this outdoor space, so we're expanding that. We have a small portion on the inside of the there is no speaker there. I've sat on those chairs for 6.5 years, so I know the process. If you would like, I'll point it out. But the only area we could do as an interior, as a sitting area that was contiguous with the existing space was the one that is adjacent to it. And then the rest of it is actually all dedicated to the kitchen, and the kitchen connects at the north end of the building with the expanded kitchen. So therefore, the path in any way going to the stair was going through the kitchen was not practical for this building. However, again, I repeat, the upstairs is a totally separate unit. It is not part of the restaurant. It has nothing to do with the restaurant, so to speak. And therefore, there is no client that needs to go up there, that needs to reach an elevator and go upstairs. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to
answer. Step up here and
sure.
point it on the drawings. I think it would be better for. Thanks.
Sticker right here.
There used to be one.
Right here. There. This is the existing restaurant, and this portion was, if you've been there, this is the part that was closed. This is all going to be opened up. So essentially, we're capitalizing on this gorgeous courtyard, which is unique in Glendale. There's no place like this in Glendale. And across the street, council just approved 270 clients for us just 3 days ago. There's going to be building right across the street that is going to be 270 condo units. The only part that we could connect to this was this portion of this building, because we needed to expand the kitchen. We expanded the kitchen a little bit in here, but the kitchen goes through here and it connects all there. So it totally intercepts essentially the path of the client to the area. So all the clients come in from here and they come in from there, and that is not going to change. He doesn't want to change the characteristic. Everybody knows about the building, and everybody either walks from Broadway, because there are two parking structures in Glendale that are used primarily for this building. And the other people would be using this back area. This is all maneuvering area. We have discussed this with the council, and it's been approved. And so people would be coming either there or from here. And this is totally all accessible to the handicap. I have really nothing further to add to Mr. Tom's very thorough presentation. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Mr. Jericho, could you point out where the existing building line is and where the newly acquired building is?
This was the old building.
Space or the building?
Well, there are two separate structures here. They were all old stores, you know. So there was a building going across in here, and there was a building going across there. This had been slightly expanded at one point, and these were all stores. There used to be a gentleman that did haircuts in here and so on and so forth. And this is the open space in the middle, which has two gorgeous trees. What we went to the council essentially is that he bought this building, which was a square building with a exit stair that you see in here. This is to be demolished. So he bought the building in here, and he didn't want to change the entry or anything. We just wanted to punch through, use part of this building as an interior sitting space, and open this up to increase the area of this open or semi-open space that he has. This is really the capital of this restaurant, if I may call that. And we also promised to the city, basically got approved as, amazingly, I've done this building as well, and this is now historic. Although this is an older building, I don't know for what reason my building is listed in the historic, but this was not. This is although an older building. But we're going to expand this treatment of the elevation all the way across here. This is just a wall effect. Essentially, I haven't presented the elevation because, I'm sorry, I'm blocking you.
No.
That was not a criteria, but this treatment is being expanded in here all the way through with a front wall that depicts the same character in here. It continues that. And we expanded a piece in here, a new building, which is an expansion of the kitchen. And then we connected the kitchen because otherwise you would have blocked all this back area. Inside this building, we have all this as a prep kitchen, and this is a restroom for the employees only, and a connection that goes to the cooking area.
And point to the office, the existing office is,
This is the upstairs area.
but it's on top of
This is on top of
the newly purchased building.
That was a two-story building, and they were actually the owner was a lady lawyer, and they retired and they sold the building, and I remodeled this building in 1992 and converted it and did the brick treatment and so on. All that was done in 92 by us for Mr. Ufalian, who occupied the building since then, and now he has sold the building and gone.
And what we're seeing on the plans of the office is existing. It's not proposed. So the restrooms are in already.
We relocated a few things. The stair was right smack in the middle. We've picked it and put it on the side in here. And there were toilets, and we've expanded the toilets, basically.
But when you say we have, you mean,
This is
is
part-
this existing now, or
Yes,
is this part
yes.
of the proposed
No, that's
remodel?
existing now. This
Thank
is
you.
not part of this conversation. It's already existing.
If there's no need for Mr. Dur-Sarkisian at the exhibit, perhaps he can return back to the microphone in case there are any further questions, so the viewing audience can participate as well.
I have nothing further to add. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
For a point of interest, what year are these buildings constructed, original building
Oh.
plans?
I believe that the brick building on the left-hand side, which was purchased, I believe it dates from late 30s. I want to say 36, 38, something like that. I don't know about the date of the building next door. I think that is probably a little bit newer, but maybe not much. That's my guess as an architect by the character of the
The
building.
restaurant building?
No, the present restaurant building, yes. And those were done as storefronts, and that type of a storefront was maybe early 50-ish, something like that. But the old brick building has non-reinforced 13-inch brick walls, and I have dealt with those bricks now for over 12 years, and I can tell you that that's a late 30 building, somewhere 34, 36, something like that.
That's consistent with our observations as well, which is why the buildings were previously legal non-conforming as to their disabled access compliance. And the portion of the building which Mr. Dur-Sarkisian described as previously being occupied by individual stores, there was no access for the original construction, and what was done in order to create the restaurant space itself did, of course, improve that for that restaurant space.
We have done a great deal of seismic reinforcing in the building, I can tell you. We have now put in a total moment system in the old building, and we have taken all the loads off the brick walls. I mean, a considerable amount of money has been spent in making that building, I would say, as good as any.
That was done recently, or?
That was done, part of it was done recently, and part of it was done in 92. 92, we did what was then required of tying the walls to the brick walls and so forth, but in this new remodeling, we have introduced a totally new moment frame in the middle of this building and tied that, and as well as taking the entire roof off and putting a new roof compliant, which totally is supported by the center columns and this new structure.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
In the existing office, second floor office, when it used to be used as an office, how did people get to it? Was there another
Stairs.
elevator?
No.
Stairs
There
only?
was an elevator in the building.
Okay. And the report indicates there'll be a, quote, limited number of employees. That's very subjective. What number of employees is that?
I think use may change. If I tell you 15 today, it would be a number, but tomorrow maybe 12, and another day maybe 18. I would say at this point his plan is to use it for his usage and how many people he will draw back, whether he have dressing rooms for them or not. I'm not, but basically at this point is an administrative space. What has changed in the building is that it used to have primarily a client entrance at Broadway and had a parking lot at the back. The story is long, but the parking lot got damaged by city selling the alleyway that goes towards the post office building, if you know that. That was taken away, and that really aggravated the traffic situation at the back for all the people who occupy those areas around it. So finally it got to a point where the attorney was really suffering from being able to get into his office. So the two got together, and the owner of the restaurant went to him and said, listen, you're an attorney, you can operate everywhere. I cannot. I'm a restaurant. I need to remain in here. So why don't you sell your building to me? Because there is no solution. And ergo, all of this project, this is how it was born.
Okay. The reason for my question is that, to me, the easy part of the case, as you hinted, is the restaurant. The restaurant's accessible to the customers of the restaurant. But the office is a business that is a place of business that has its own employees who will be using that office as a workplace. And the law requires not only that restaurants be accessible and banquet halls and bars, and I am convinced that the restaurant sounds accessible, so that's easy. That's done in my mind. But the fact that the upper floor is going to become an administrative office space that may employ potentially 12 to 18 people, and I see it has restrooms, and it's more than just one owner sitting at a computer. It sounds like it's going to be a business, a place of business with a dozen or more employees, and so the state law and our local code requires places of business that have potential employees to be accessible to the employees, and I'm wondering about that aspect. If I were a wheelchair-bound job hunter and I applied for a job at Rafi's place, it sounds like I wouldn't be able to get to the elevator.
Oh, sure you would, certainly. You would arrive at the back area, get off your car in this totally flat area. You would enter the doors and ride the elevator up. Absolutely.
Okay. So any potential employees who are disabled won't be barred from access to the office space?
Absolutely.
It's just that they can't get there by every route of travel through the restaurant.
Yes, I think his back door, his door to his business is accessible to the handicap. Absolutely
thank
handicap.
you.
yeah.
I think, Board Member Dentler, your last clarification is very germane to this particular appeal. And as Mr. Sarkisian has indicated, the upper floor, by the addition of this elevator, as far as I've been able to ascertain from a brief review of the packet, will actually be 100% compliant. The issue is that if this is associated with the restaurant space, there needs to be an accessible path of travel from all portions, including the dining area, which there is not at this time. But a potential employee could certainly go through the parking area, park his or her car in a disabled access space, exit the vehicle, go into an elevator, and arrive at that upper floor. This particular space would, in fact, even be compliant if at some point in time the owner determines that he or she does not need an administrative office to run the restaurant, and if this were to be rented or leased out to a completely separate party as an office space, it is completely accessible.
So appreciate that. So I guess then the only, am I correct in thinking that there could still be a potential limited number of employees of the restaurant, for instance, servers who you suggested might need to change uniforms, something of that nature, that some limited number of such employees might be essentially barred from accessing the administrative office place of the business? And it's that limited number that is the basis for Mr. Tom's conclusion that this is a minimal
Slight
impact. Is that, and am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And unless I'm incorrect in interpreting what you have presented here, it would be possible for an employee of this restaurant, whether it be a waiter, waitress, anybody of that position, to still get to the upper floor, because as an employee of the restaurant, they would be fully entitled to either pass through the kitchen where a patron would not, or they could always, while it's not a direct interior route of travel, there's also still a completely accessible exterior route of travel which would go right through the lobby. But it is possible if it's a rainy day and the person did not want to go outside, whereas a common patron such as one of us would not be privy to traversing through the kitchen, an employee certainly could. And so they could get to the lobby and to the upper floor either internally or externally. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Thank you.
I wasn't quite sure which of these doors actually went through.
I have a quick question. What is the square footage of the office space going to be?
I believe it's somewhere around 2,000 square feet, a little less than 2,000. I think the entire upper floor is 22, and if you took away the restroom and the stair and so forth, you have maybe 1,800 square foot up there, net.
So 1,800 square foot would be dedicated to the office
Sometimes,
use.
yes.
And it's the way it's set up now is presently going to be used by the restaurant
Yes.
owner.
It's all
just for
inside.
his-
The two paths of travel, one of which always existed, go through the first floor to discharge to the street. So that remains. So it would be difficult, not difficult, but you would have to do some work to totally segregate the upstairs. So, and he has no plans to do that. I mean, after what he spent and his expansion, he's not about to rent that. That's part of his operation.
I think the reason why I'm kind of piggybacking off of what Commissioner Dendler had said was if at a later time, if the owner decided to rent the office space out to a separate entity and it was to be used solely as a place of business for that business, how would the employees or how would the patrons of that business have access if they were disabled? And I think that's more or less the question you were
I
asking.
wondered that too, and there weren't dimensions shown on our exhibit, so it was hard for me to understand how small or large this was. So
Board Member Wu, Board Member Dentler, if that were to happen in the future, the building would actually be in greater compliance, because in that particular case, the office space is compliant, has a completely accessible elevator and lobby, and if it's a separate place of business, there is no legal requirement that somebody from the restaurant has to have a continuous path of travel to a completely independent office. They merely have to have access from the public right-of-way and from accessible parking spaces, which this would have.
Great.
Mr. Tom, I just have a question. Well, thank you very much for all this explanation, and board members for your questioning. It's great. Looking at the existing restaurant downstairs and the office space directly above it, it's understood that this is going to be an office with multiple accommodation, toilet facilities, fully disabled access, and everything. And I do see that one of the stairways, at least its interior stair, is directly connecting the first floor to the second floor offices, correct? Yes. Well, as Mr. Tom suggested and board members, obviously this may or may not be able to, the second floor may not be able to lease out separately to a different office because it's going through the restaurant. Well, is there a possibility that the intention is really to convert the offices in the future, maybe as expansion of the restaurant, since there are multiple accommodation toilet facilities provided upstairs as well, and there's an interior connection?
I can't tell, but I don't think he has any intent to expand the restaurant. I can tell you that much. I think if he uses it or expands it and has more staff or somebody, I don't know. But at this point, he's well entrenched there.
Okay.
He even has a very large walk-in refrigerator in the next door building that you would know as the former Social Security building. Because he owned the apartment house that is on north of the alley, which city purchased from him, in turn turned it into one parcel and sold it to a third party. And in that transaction, he negotiated having a very large storage space in the basement of the Social Security building. So he's entrenched there as a business. And with what is going around him in Glendale, I think he's going to need every square foot of the kitchen. Trust me.
Okay. Chairman Kashishi and members of the board, we, as we looked at this plan, we don't have any reason to believe that his intent is to do anything other at this time than to expand a restaurant. If sometime in the future, people's plans do change. If something were to change, he would be required at that time to submit plans for tenant improvement, and at that time, he would have to demonstrate compliance with the codes that would then be in effect. And if they even become stricter, he would have to comply with those standards in order to bifurcate the space into a separate leasable area up above. But as you correctly pointed out, there is permanent, unrestricted communication from that office space to the restaurant down below by a stairway. And so in its current configuration, it can't be leased out separately.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board members?
One last question.
Please.
What's going to be the expansion, the dining area is going to be expanded as well, you said, into the adjacent?
Yes.
How much square footage is the expansion, do you know?
Oh, God, you're testing my memory now. I think, again, we have something like 2,400 square foot on the first floor. Out of that, probably half of it is other space. So about maybe 1,200 square foot, something like that, would be an indoor dining space extension of Rafi's restaurant. Actually, what we're doing is taking the indoor space that presently is that rectangle and moving it beyond that wall.
That's great.
And that portion we're going to open just like it is across from the courtyard, which is essentially the roof remains, but all the storefronts are removed, and it's a semi-covered sitting area. I probably think most everybody has been there once.
Yes.
It's such a there are two restaurants in Glendale that shine in 4 counties that I know, and that is Rafi's, and is Portos. If you go these 4 counties and ask, everybody knows about those 2 restaurants. He gets clients all the way from Santa Barbara. You may not believe this, but they come down all the way to Santa Barbara to eat there.
How many seats would that be in addition to the existing number of seats? That's
I believe it's on the drawing. My recollection is
roughly.
we are above 120, something like that, 130, 140 seat restaurant. It's the largest sitting restaurant in Glendale, frankly.
So it'd be adding.
And this is total. This is total.
Oh,
Total.
with the addition of
Two
about
together.
130.
Oh, yeah, we are not adding. The primary focus for our remodeling was the expansion of the kitchen because he has a great deal of to-go business. And on Sundays, he completely refuses any to-go order. He cannot handle it. So the primary goal of the remodeling was an expansion of kitchen, was not to add so much seating space. We're adding some seating space, but that was not the primary goal.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions from board members? Well, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. As a matter of protocol, if there's no further discussion at this point,
Yes.
you can you can discuss it further amongst yourselves, and then when it is appropriate, the only 2 possible motions that can be made, since this is a ratification hearing, would either be A1 to ratify the building official's exemption, or else A2 to deny the applicant's request.
Okay, if there are no other questions, do we have a motion to either approve or deny?
I would like to entertain a motion to ratify the building official's decision.
All you need to do is indicate that you would like to move item 6A1.
I'll rephrase.
Is
I
there a
would
second?
like to make a motion to accept item 6A1.
Second the motion.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Alexander Wu,
Yes.
Board Member Michael Chikmajian,
Yes.
Board Member John Tatulian,
Yes.
Board Member Deborah Dentler,
Yes.
Chairman Eric Kishishian.
Yes.
Very good. With that, item 6A has been ratified. Note to the appellant, it will take a little while in order to administratively get the action letter out. Technically, there is still a 30-day appeal. Since I don't see anybody in the audience, I don't think anybody will be appealing this ratification, although stranger things have happened. I would like to admonish you not to move forward until you get your formal written action letter and the appeal period has lapsed. Actually, I stand corrected. It's not 10 days, it's 15 days. But it's not 30. It's a 15-day appeal period. This board's action is appealable in all cases to the City Council. But I don't see anybody here objecting, so I tend to doubt that there will be an appeal. But please do not progress any further until the appeal period has lapsed. And with that, thank you very much.
We can progress and stop at the permit line on your desk, so to speak.
You're welcome to do whatever you would like to do in the comfort of your office. How's that? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go back to Ms. Luna.
Item number 7, reports information only. Subtopic A, the monthly building and safety report.
Chairman Kashishian, members of the board, at item 7A, we have our regular monthly building and safety report. And if you turn your attention to the last tab, I would like to fill you in on where we are at this time. First off, I would like to remind the board that we report on a fiscal period commencing on July 1st and ending on June 30th of each year. And this being our monthly meeting for March, the report that you have in front of you closes out the building activity through the end of February 2010. What I would like to do is just point out a few things that you might have already focused on, but if you have not, I would just like to draw your attention to some characteristics of this report. First off, on the first page, under Building Activity Report, on the third line, multifamily dwellings. This particular line is pretty indicative of what we have experienced here in Glendale, and I see Chairman Kashishian nodding his head. It's fairly typical of other communities in the area, and that is a trend in the reduction of multifamily dwelling projects, which are either started through the plan check process or else actually constructed. We here in Glendale actually had a few projects which had already been permitted that were abandoned, and that's clearly a state of the financial economy. And if you were to take a look at this report, what you will find is that year to date, and considering the fact that February begins to get close to the end of the fiscal reporting period, through the end of February, we only had one multifamily unit project here in Glendale for the entire city. Furthermore, while you would not be able to ascertain this by looking at line 3, turns out I know how to look at other portions of this report, and I can tell you that that particular apartment building consisted of only 4 units. So it was a very, very small apartment building. That can also be discerned by taking a look at the valuation that's reported in the second to the right column for that one project on line 3. And that was a very small apartment with a total valuation of only $800,000, which is consistent with a 4-unit apartment. So it would not surprise me if we closed out the entire year with this being the only multifamily unit building built in the city of Glendale. I would have hoped to see a little bit more activity, but that is all we've seen so far. In contrast, if you take a look at the third column on that line, you'll see at the same time last year, during which we were already experiencing the sluggishness of the economy, we had already seen 9 apartments this same time last year. Furthermore, if you take a look at the far right column on line number 3, the total valuation of those 9 projects last year approached $21 million. So you can see that while we had already begun to experience some of the sluggishness of the economy this time last year, we are right in the depths of it right now. And so that's where we are with respect to some of the activity. I would like to draw your attention to the bottom of our valuation totals, which is about 2/3 of the way down. After line number 23 in your report, under totals, you'll see that the total valuation of work that we have handled so far through the end of February just exceeded $52.5 million of construction here in Glendale. If you were to compare that to what we had seen the same time last year, we had seen about $110 million last year. So the valuation, so the magnitude of the projects that we're seeing is actually about half of what we had seen last year. In terms of dwelling units, because dwelling units are a very, very important indicator of construction activity, for a dwelling unit summary, you will actually see that as far as the total number of units gained, single-family units, so far this year we have gained 11 new single-family dwellings, whereas last year we had gained 8 by this time. But if you go down a little bit under apartment units, this is where those previous valuation totals that I drew to your attention really manifest themselves. So far in this particular year, we have seen an addition of 4 new dwelling units, whereas those 9 apartment buildings that we had last time added 153 dwelling units to our housing stock just here in Glendale alone. So that's a difference of 149 dwelling unit deficit compared to our activity last year. Of course, in order to construct some buildings, sometimes it's necessary to demolish some buildings. So while those are the units gained, There are also some units lost. What really becomes important in terms of identifying how healthy our community's building stock is looking at the bottom line for this particular section of the report, and that's the net total dwelling units gained for that particular period. And closing out February 10th of this particular year, we actually gained a total of 45 dwelling units, some of those in the form of apartment units, some in terms of single family, and then some 34 of which were dwelling units that were associated with a mixed-use project. In comparison to last year, by February of last year, we had gained a total of 118 dwelling units within the city of Glendale, and so our housing stock was growing at a much faster rate last year. The difference between this year and last year is a reduction, comparatively speaking, of 73 dwelling units, so clearly our housing stock is growing at a much slower rate than last year. It's interesting because this is a census year, and I would like to encourage everybody who's listening to participate in the census. It's very important for us. But in terms of how our local population is growing, it will be interesting to see whether or not our housing stock is keeping up with the demand that we need right here. The only other thing that I would like to draw to your attention on this page before we flip the report over is our customer count. And we have seen this consistently now for a couple of years, despite the fact that the magnitude of people's construction projects and the valuation thereof has been reduced. We are seeing an increase in the number of customers that we are dealing with. In fact, not only are we seeing an increase in the customers, some of the projects that they're submitting, because they're having to be very creative in what they're able to build or what they're financially capable of building, is getting rather tricky and complex. So the amount of time that we spend with the customers is increasing as well. Our current month, we saw, or current being February, we saw 1,677 walk-in customers through our doors. February of 2009, we had 1,486 walk-in customers through our doors. That's in 1 month. That is an increase of 191 more people this year than we had last year, despite the fact that the valuation of work that was built is about half. So we are serving this community with more people having more questions and needing more assistance to a higher degree this year, despite the fact that what they're building may actually be smaller in magnitude. Year-to-date totals, so far through the end of March, 14,806 people walked through our doors compared to last year, 13,138. That's a difference of 1,668 more people walking in needing assistance this particular reporting period. What is interesting is if you take our monthly count and our yearly total and divide them out, it is dead even. 1.3% increase in customers. That's what we are seeing month after month, and our statistics are very, very consistent, and our year-to-date shows that so far through the end of February, we have served 1.3% more customers than last time. With that, I'd like you to turn to the back page of this report, and this is our income summary. What I'd like to do first is draw your attention about 3/4 of the way down the page. If you take a look in the left-hand column, you're going to see a line item identified as Parks Mitigation Fee. Okay, it's about 3/4 of the way down, and that's a relatively new fee that the City Council established, and it has two component parts. One part of it, it was one ordinance. One part of it deals with revenue to enhance our library services, and that's the line item up above, library mitigation fee. And then the other is the parks mitigation fee. This is a fee that is collected on construction projects based on a number of parameters, and it is intended to generate revenue to enhance our park services through the construction of parks features, in some cases acquisition of park land, and other things that benefit our community. The magnitude of the parks mitigation fee is directly related to the impact that the project would have on our existing park system. So there is a nexus between the fee that is collected and the demand that that project is expected to impose upon our parks system. What you will see is that our current year to date, despite the fact that this is a relatively new fee and that our construction volume is down, we have collected already over $1 million for this community. And while this fee goes to the parks system to enhance our park services, the Permit One-Stop Center is the mechanism, it's the vehicle by which we collect those fees. Because it was a new fee, if you were to compare that to the same time last year, we had only collected slightly more than $60,000. So the good news is that the ordinance is doing what it was intended to do. The general fund should not be utilized to provide the needed and necessary parks for our community. Instead, as development imposes more demands on our existing park services, that development should be held to task and pay for that impact, and that's what that impact fee is for. The only other thing that I would like to do on this particular page is draw your attention to the very bottom of the tabular portion, and those are the total revenues. So far, closing out the month of February 2010, Building and Safety had brought in $1,567,307. In comparison to last year, which still had some of the volume from the initial improvements from the Americana project, we had brought in $2,383,718. What I would like to do is I'd like to draw your attention to a new feature that we've added onto this report to help keep you and other city officials informed of where our revenue is coming in, and that's the little box at the bottom. I have named that box the cost recovery ratio. Unlike some cities that don't really monitor what proportion of the cost is being covered by fees, I have consistently kept an eye on what portion of the fees necessary to support the Permit Services Center and all of what Building and Safety does is supported by fees. And the reason that that's important to me is that while some services clearly are not provided that directly relate or manifest themselves in a construction project, most of it is. And therefore, a very, very high percentage of the services that we provide should be fully covered by the fees that we collect. In general, the target that we have traditionally shot for is about 70% cost recovery. And the reason for that, once again, is that about 30% of what we do does not directly translate into a construction project. An example of that might be some of the information and services that we provide to the real estate community, for example. When people are interested in purchasing a new home, for example, quite often their realtor will come down and do their due diligence and look up records and ask for our assistance to find out what's legal, what's not legal, and we provide a service for that, yet that service does not result in either a plan check or a permit being issued or inspections being performed, because that's just a service that's provided to people who in our community who are buying a new home, for example. So some portion of what we do cannot, there is no nexus between that and a permit fee. And since by law, any fee that we collect can only go towards providing the service that's intended for that, there is some appropriate ratio. And what we have traditionally looked for is 70%. What I want to draw your attention to is this was the first month that we dropped below 70% as a result of our economy. Our cost recovery ratio for the month of February, while it was very close, is still technically slightly below that. It came in at 69.1%. So we're very, very close, but we are under my target. In comparison Virtually every other community that I am aware of is currently operating at a cost recovery ratio substantially less than even 69.1%. I won't put Beverly Hills on the spot, so I won't ask Mr. Kashishian where they're doing, but the last time I did check with their building official, Mr. Chavez, they are substantially less than where we are. So in comparison, I think we're doing pretty well. But the important thing to consider is we need the economy to turn around. What I would like to point out is actually where we were this time last year. Due to some of the revenues that were brought in from projects such as the Americana, as I mentioned, year-to-date last year, we had brought in $2,383,718. That was actually a cost recovery ratio of 105%. We actually brought in more than my budgeted total. Okay? But while these things fluctuate, over time they do end up balancing themselves out. It is one of the tightrope acts that we do here in building and safety and within the community planning department to make sure that we do have a healthy budget here in the city of Glendale, and we are going through the budget study sessions very shortly. But whereas last time we were at 105%, we're right about where we should be, 69.1%, although I would not want to stay below that line much longer. And with that, that was a fairly detailed report. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
I have a quick question. This will show what a newcomer I am, but
Sure.
on the flip, the end page here.
Building activity report?
Yeah, these real big numbers that you pointed us to under the previous year-to-date columns.
Mm-hmm.
The size of those numbers, is that primarily attributable to the Americana dwellings coming online?
Most of those are, yes. I don't have an actual line item breakdown.
That's good,
so
but
I
just
can't tell you,
roughly
but
speaking,
most
that's
of
what
them
we can
are.
attribute. So we're not likely to see a project of that scale. So that's maybe previous year to date, those huge numbers.
Some of those are
perhaps
anomalous.
are a little, okay. That's what I was wondering. Okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Yes.
Last time we had a discussion, or maybe you informed us that Public Works and Building and Safety were having a reorganization.
Ah.
And does that have any type of effect in any future earnings or in the current, or how is that restructuring affecting Building and Safety? Is it complete? Where are we in this process?
Well, that's a two-part question. Board Member Tertullian. I will actually address the second part first. The restructuring is complete. Building and Safety has been formally moved from the Public Works Department to a newly formulated department which goes by the name Community Planning Department. Community Planning is comprised of three divisions: Building and Safety Division, the Planning Division, and the Neighborhood Services Division. With respect to the second portion the first portion of your question, does this have any effect on the budget? I'm going to say that it doesn't have a direct impact on the budget, because that portion of Public Works budget, which was previously allocated to my operation, Building and Safety, went with my operation to the new Community Planning Department. However, as part of the Community Planning Department, in balancing budgets and figuring out from a responsible standpoint what the best way to deal with all general fund supported operations, my divisional budget is examined and considered with the other two divisions within the Community Planning Department. So everybody's budget is under scrutiny right now, and I'm sure that our City Council is going to see to it that an appropriate budget gets approved.
Thank you.
Sure. And are there any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Tom, about the parks mitigation fee that you mentioned, and you said it's accessible on most projects, some projects. What type of project is it, if you know?
I'm actually going to take a pass on that one because I would rather not speak out of turn and misguide some of our viewing public. What I will indicate is that most new construction is subject to the parks mitigation fee, and during the application process, we do indeed identify whether or not a project is subjected to a parks impact fee, and if so, what the liability of that fee is. In some cases, it can be quite sizable. To put it into perspective, the projects that are subjected to the highest parks mitigation fees are residential projects which have a large number of bedrooms, because if a residential project supports more people living in the city, the potential impact of those new residents that are housed in that unit in needing parks services is rather significant compared to, for example, the construction of a new multi-story parking structure.
Thank you.
Mr. Tom, I have a quick question. You said that this parks mitigation fee is fairly new, but on the footnote it says fees effective November 2007. So the fees were in place since November 2007, but we actually started collecting on it recently. Is that?
No, Board Member Wu, members of the board, when the ordinance was initially passed, because of the fact that the fees were eventually going to be very large. In fact, they are the largest fees that we collect for development. They exceed, in some cases, all other fees combined. That's how significant the parks mitigation fee is. It was done with a tiered fee introduction schedule, and each year the fees will go up until they get to the point at which they stabilize. In addition to that, when the ordinance was initially passed, there were a number of projects that were deemed to be in what was referred to as the pipeline. And those projects were either subjected to reduced fees or they were exempted from the fees because those projects had already advanced to a particular stage that it was deemed unreasonable or unjust to retroactively apply a fee that they could not have known when they started their project. However, since then, the fees have caught up, and all the new projects for which these fees are applicable, they are being assessed, these fees.
Thank you.
Very good. With that, I actually have another report at item 7B. There is nothing in your packet. This is just a brief report because this board had made a request to me before to always keep it informed when there would be changes to our code. I would like to report that on January 12th of this year, the California Building Standards Commission did indeed take the final steps to adopt the 2010 California Building Standards Code. California Building Standards Code is comprised of numerous parts, the most familiar of which are such codes as the building code, the electrical code, the fire code, the plumbing code, the mechanical code, and the list goes on. Also, what is relatively new is that the California Building Standards Code also has some new parts which are relatively unfamiliar to most individuals. Those are Part 2.5 of Title 24, which is the California Residential Code. The state of California has never had a residential code before. Residential structures were previously under the regulatory authority of the building code. Now there is a dedicated California Residential Code, which will become the law of the land, that will apply to all detached 1- and 2-family dwellings up to 3 stories in height. Residential buildings which do not fall into that category would be regulated by the building code. Another code that I would like to draw your attention to is the California Green Building Code. Perhaps if you've been watching the council, you're aware of the fact that our city is interested in being very, very responsible to see to it that construction within the city limits of Glendale do follow sustainable practices, and the state of California has adopted the first ever statewide green building code in this country. The City Council took an action to watch what the state of California would do to ensure that it did not take too many steps down a path that it might find itself needing to backtrack upon, and wanted to see where the state of California would go with what has now been nationally dubbed Cal Green. That is what the California Green Building Code is now referred to as. Cal Green, in its adopted form, now has three parts. There are the minimum mandatory standards, which we have no choice. Nobody has a choice. Once this code becomes effective, all new construction will have to comply with the minimum mandatory standards, and there are no exceptions to that. In addition to that, there are two additional levels which go significantly above and beyond the mandatory standards, and those are referred to as Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 2 being the most stringent. When I last appeared before the City Council, I assured the Council that one of the things that we would be doing would be looking at Tier 1 and Tier 2 to see how well they fit in our community, because it's pretty well expected that this city is not going to settle on the minimum mandatory state standards. We're going to be interested in looking at some green standards which exceed the mandatory standards. The question comes into play, what is best for this community, Tier 1 or Tier 2? In some cases, going for the most stringent standards might be good. In some cases, it may not be good for a given community. And every community is looking at these standards right now. In some instances, if standards are too costly and too strict, they may actually hinder construction. And if they hinder construction, then we all know the cycle that can follow there. And it, in some cases, is not good for a community. If it turns out that the strictest of the standards, Tier 2, is something that we feel is achievable and sustainable by the developers within this community, it might be something that we are still interested in pursuing, because it is good in the long run for the community. So that's where we are with that. The California Building Standards, the entire package, which is sometimes referred to as Title 24 of the California Code of Regulations, takes effect for state projects right around July 3rd of this year. Local jurisdictions, including Glendale, will then have 180 days to either adopt those standards in an unamended form, or we can then amend them locally, provided our amendments are as strict or stricter than the state mandate. We can never adopt standards which are less stringent than the state. And furthermore, that we are able to justify any amendment which we codify in terms of at least one of three defined criteria. And those three criteria are, number one, that the amendment is necessary due to a local geologic condition. Number two, that it's required to provide adequate protection to the community for a local topographic condition. Or number three, that it's necessary for a climatic condition. And we do it every 3 years, and we'll do it again this year as well. This year, the effort is going to be a little bit more extensive than in past triennial adoption cycles, because we will be adopting a residential code for the first time, and then also the Green Building Code. And so whatever we do to adopt and amend those codes is administrative work that we have never done before. And those documents are rather complex and lengthy, and so it will take a tremendous amount of staff time. Despite the fact that the statewide codes have not yet been published, so they are not available, I do have early access to some portions of those codes because I do serve on a number of state statewide committees, and so I do have working documents. That'll give us a little bit of a head start, but even with the head start, we're probably going to end up getting pretty close to the wire in order to adopt an ordinance and have it take effect without the necessity of an urgency clause. So therefore, sometime beginning of November, we will be introducing an ordinance and requesting that the City Council follow up 2 weeks later with adoption of an ordinance to adopt what will then be referred to as the 2011 Glendale Building and Safety Code, which is comprised of 8 distinct parts, which include, among other things, building code, fire code, electrical code, plumbing code, mechanical code, and so forth. And with that, if there are any questions with regard to adoption of state codes, I would be happy to address them.
Well, Mr. Tom, will you be adopting the code as is, you think, or there will be some local amendments?
Not a chance will we adopt it as is. This community, as most sophisticated cities, take the opportunity to fine-tune the code in a manner which better suits our community, as you can imagine, with a community that has topographic issues in some of the steeper portions of our city and some of the canyons and elsewhere. We do put additional protective measures in there to see to it that development exceeds the minimum state standards. In addition to that, we are subjected to some climatic forces that we can't control. We have very, very severe and drying Santa Ana winds seasonally from time to time, which can cause very serious fire problems if we don't adjust our codes to see to it that construction within high fire hazard severity zones is handled appropriately. And then, of course, we do have very significant geologic concerns here as well. We do have at least 2 very active faults in the area, which do make seismicity a concern to us. In addition to that, for those that are familiar with the state's seismic hazard map acts, we do have various portions of the city that are prone to seismically induced landslides, and we do have areas that are subject to potential seismically induced liquefaction due to some geologic characteristics and the level of our groundwater table. And as a result, we do have some additional standards that we impose from a seismic standard. In total, if my memory serves me correctly, our amendment package here in the city of Glendale in the past has generally run about 150 pages long. It's not by any means a simple document. It's about 150 pages of amendments, all properly justified, and prior to our presentation to the council, in all likelihood, I will give this board an advanced look if you are interested.
Thank you very much.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to you for any final questions or comments you may have, or you can entertain a motion for adjournment.
Board members, are there any discussion or any questions? And if there aren't any, does it happen? Motion to adjourn, please.
Well, with that, then, before we get a motion, I would like to just one more time welcome our 2 newest board members to this board. Thank you for your volunteerism to the city. By the way, for the viewing public who may not know this, the 5 board members here that do serve for the Building and Fire Board of Appeals, and actually all the board members here, they do this on their own time. They're not paid to do this, so thank you very much.
We're not?
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, who's wearing their green? None of us.
No, all the better.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
I move to adjourn.
Second the motion.
Well, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, let's officially get the roll call
Okay.
for the record.
Board Member Alexander Wu.
Yes.
Board Member Michael Chikmajian.
Yes.
Board Member John Tatulian.
Yes.
Board Member Deborah Dentler.
Yes.
Chairman Eric Hishishian.
And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.